Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest CAR-PGA video panel. I'm very excited about our guest today and also excited to bring you the latest news as to what we've been doing with the CAR-PGA. We are in May. I'm trying to keep track of where I am. We are in May, so where we left our communication, we were talking about coming up with some ideas for mental health for freelancers. Pretty prominent topic for role playing. It was brought up in the Wizards of the Coast influencer stream, and it's something that we think the CAR-PGA would be uniquely suited to address. So we will address it. We have a page for gamers, for those of you who remember that, and those of you who don't. If you go to the CAR-PGA section, you'll actually see there's a page for resources, and we'd love to add this too. So I'm going to give it a little bit more time. We didn't get a lot of feedback, but I'm hoping we'll hear some more, particularly because we have some therapists in the CAR-PGA membership. And we will update that. And certainly, if we don't get anything else, we'll go with what we got and post that to there. And that's all I have for our membership update. So I'm super excited to introduce Steph C. Hello, Steph, as I add your pin. Hello. Steph C of TTRPGkids, which I'm going to say TTRPG. If I say it too fast, I blur the whole thing together. So TTRPGkids.com, I guess. Kind of. Yeah. TTRPGkids, but that's where it is, TTRPGkids. And thank you for joining us, Steph. I'm very excited to have you. We're looking forward to sort of essentially just figuring out, you can sort of guess TTRPGkids is in the name, but we're going to ask you a couple of questions to sort of get into gaming and then take it from there as to how the intersection of gaming and kids and opportunity. So I always start with just the first piece, because I feel like it tells a lot about generally the journey that we were all on, is that our love of role-playing games. So could you tell us a little bit about essentially what inspired you to sort of, what was your gaming background and how that led to TTRPG Kids?
So my first time playing a tabletop RPG was playing Dungeons and Dragons in my mid to late 20s. So I did not start playing tabletop RPGs as a kid. It was definitely oh, I've heard of Dungeons and Dragons. My husband started playing with a group at his work, and it was like a little mini campaign, 3 sessions. And for the last one, they were like, oh yeah, Steph can join. For the last one, it's all good. And so I joined in, and I had an absolute blast, but then it ended because it was the last one of the small mini campaign. And adult life happening and whatnot, and nobody picking up the GM role for another one. It was just kind of, faded into the background a little bit. But then after it was very shortly after I had my kid. So this would have been 4.5 years ago. My brother was like, hey, there's this podcast, or there's this show called Critical Role. And that got me hooked pretty bad. It was I watched so many episodes, and I was like, oh, I've played D&D before. I want to do this again so much. And I started coming up with my own world, homebrewed everything, ran with a massive size group. It was 6 or 7 players. A whole bunch of them were new because we were all listening to Critical Role and we want to play it, and there were some little splashes of player conflict in there because people were kind of figuring each other out. There was a pretty big learning curve with handling that big of a party for my first time and having everything homebrewed, but it was also still fun. So that campaign went for, I want to say, about 6 to 8 months. And it was shortly after all the COVID stuff kind of kicked in and we started going into lockdown. It kind of petered out, and we took a break because everyone was trying to figure their life out again.
Yeah, sure.
And we started up kind of an online one again later. since then I have done like 3 campaign play tests. This is all in the like just the past couple years. There's like a whole bunch of campaign play tests. I think I have written about, like this was like lots of reviews and featured projects for like, it's over 100 tabletop RPGs for
Wow.
the TTRPGkids website. And like I've done, this is your first D&D campaign for like a bunch of friends and like coworkers and whatnot. So it, there might not be many years in it, but it was pretty jam-packed past like couple or few years getting into all of this. So
wow, that's
dove in
amazing.
head first.
That's awesome. So, I mean, so relatively recent then, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in 5+ years, give or take. That's great. And of course, you chalk another one up for Critical Role, right? And this is not the
Yeah.
this is not the cartoon. We're talking about the podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is not any of the ancillary stuff that came. I was laughing because I think I saw Critical Role socks
Yeah.
at like one of the stores in the mall. And I was like, wait a minute.
I think I have my Gilmore's Glorious Goods shirt on right now.
That's amazing. That's perfect. Yes.
And that was from like a while ago, because that was my first D&D group got me that one.
That's so funny. So, and of course, right, to your point, like there's now like traditional CR fan, like, the fans coming in from other things and they're like, no, you didn't catch it when it was, when it was first launched, which is really funny. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
And wonderful to see, like you said, that you were able to sort of not just sort of be interested in it, but turn it into it's so accessible, and it's great to see that it brought you together. I'm interested in the player conflict. I laugh about that because I always say, it's always challenging. It's different when everybody's new.
Mm-hmm.
It's challenging when you bring one person in who's new. And I always say, if you play long enough, you will have saved each other's characters enough times that you'll work it out.
Yeah.
But it is a little bit like sometimes there's a little bit of like testing people's, like, let's see if this is going to work, or let me see if I can get you to do this, or if you're going to do what I say, kind of thing. So that's always fun to see, as long as it doesn't, it's friendly.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. So obviously this turned into a passion. It's not just sort of I like to play, which absolutely is fine. But you started, you came to a conclusion somewhere along the lines of doing more than just gaming or listening to the podcast. So what was that transformation? What happened?
So it was about 9-ish months after COVID lockdown. We were like, my partner and I both working at home in like pretty intense automotive engineering jobs. And like I was a crash test engineer.
Oh, wow. That is intense.
Like, yeah, automotive crash test engineer trying to analyze crash tests remotely. And we had a 2-year-old at home who was refusing to take naps. So we ended up having to kind of shake things up a little bit, and I ended up leaving my engineering job, and just because we needed to figure out like some way to kind of manage things. And I was like, and after about a month, like the engineering brain, I think, was just like, I need something to do. And I kept seeing posts from people about, I'm playing tabletop RPGs with my kids, because I was full steeped into it at this point too,
right.
Looking at different D&D resources, and they're like, I'm playing TTRPGs with my kids. There's more TTRPGs than D&D. There's this one and this one and this one. There's all this research, and I like kind of went down a rabbit hole and found this like weird mix of lots of people asking questions and either not getting answers or getting too many disparate answers from random people. It kind of felt like, or there was like little pockets of information that were really useful, but they were super hard to find. Like I really had to dig for them.
Right.
And so talking with other people and kind of coming to my own conclusions, I was like, this could be really cool if it was all sort of brought together. And there was a night I couldn't sleep, and I kind of was like, oh, well, here's how the whole website and resource would be laid out. And with some encouragement from a couple of people, like I actually went forward and did it. and it ended up being a lot of fun and helping a lot of people. So I kind of kept doing it. It grew, got this little community around it, which then caused more people to be like, hey, I can make kid-friendly TTRPGs. And it just has been slowly expanding. And I don't think I can say it's slowly been expanding anymore, because it's kind of ramping up pretty quick now. So it's been a little over 2 years, and there's like, I think over 250 articles on the site or something, something around there. And quite a few people like actively participating in it and talking about this topic. And it's also like fun with my kid. It gave me something to do while we were kind of looking for different activities that weren't just screen time and things like that, and trying to manage social skills and teach social emotional learning through tabletop RPGs. Well, we weren't able to really do the whole kind of pre-K and play dates kind of deal. So it ended up creating a lot of good moments for my particular kid, in addition to being something to help other people.
So was that, when you're talking about in person, was that like at home, or you were talking about with other groups, or how, what, in terms of what kind of engagement were you talking about?
So this was kind of like me using tabletop RPGs at home with my kid to help teach social emotional skills.
Got it.
It's kind of the way that I sort of look at it is, I have X number of years raising a child. And, at that point it was 2 years raising a child and 0 years raising a like 2.5-year-old child, because he just turned 2.5,
Right.
Versus maybe like getting assistance from pre-K or like other parents who are bringing their kids and giving advice and stuff. So without having that available because of like all the shutdown stuff, I was kind of using this as an avenue to bring a lot of that to my kid, and it ended up really helping. Role-playing situations of, this character is acting this way and this one's acting this way. How should they resolve the situation?
Right.
It ended up really helping, and was an easy way for me to also connect and explain it to my kid. So yeah.
That's awesome. And sounds like it sort of grew organically, right? So you filled the need.
Yeah.
And then I imagine there was a whole, it is funny because I feel like, I went through this phase for sure, where you're like, I really want to share my passion with my kids.
Yeah.
I can't just give them the books, right? My
Right.
son, I think, was like 4 when I started. You're like,
Mhm.
so then what can I do? Like there's some,
Yeah.
and then it's interesting because then there's not as much as you think, like everybody's doing something, but they're not always doing it in a cohesive, like you said, like it's
Mhm.
there. There's definitely people, I feel like everybody's got something, but it's not really together in one place, and it's sort of not always necessarily easy to find, or it's very like individual led. Like it's like, I do this for
Yes.
my kid, and you're like, well, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So obviously you hit on something, right? And I imagine TTRPGkids started to grow. So did you have a scope? Was the plan? You said some folks helped you. What was the evolution of this? I mean, it's pretty comprehensive, right? I mean, I see you've got, obviously it's a home for your reviews. You're listing games. You've got events and giveaways. We'll talk about the crowdfunder at some point. But you've got a lot going on. Was that how it launched, or has that sort of evolved based on sort of what you've been hearing from the community?
It definitely expanded based on requests from the community and where I saw needs popping up.
Mm-hmm.
It started out with reviews, because there's a lot of really cool games out there that don't get a ton of attention, either because they're coming from an indie creator who doesn't really have a marketing budget because it's maybe their first game, but the game is good, like it works. So I was like, I definitely want to do reviews, so that way I can get that information out there, and it gives me an opportunity to try the game out with my kid, which is kind of fun, and then I was doing interviews to get some voices on there other than my own. And then I was writing personal experience articles, or like feature pieces on something that I researched, where I went and took that like kind of maybe rabbit hole into a particular topic and found all these scattered resources. I pulled them together and laid them out in a manner of, tips and tricks and things like that. From there, it ended up growing into, I have an entire like education page for educational tabletop RPG resources. I have a list of D&D hacks, slashes, and adventures for kids. I have a massive like TTRPGs for kids list. There's podcast lists, book lists. The span of interviews kept extending. I started having so many requests for reviews that I ended up adding featured project articles to there. So there's shorter pieces that highlight projects that are maybe going to a crowdfunding campaign and need something quick on there, because I just couldn't handle the volume because there were so many coming in. So it ended up growing and growing and growing. It started out maybe there was an article every week. Now it's like 3 articles every week. At this point is I think the average I'm hitting this year. So it definitely grew, and there's like been even more requests to add more since. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, we've got gamers growing up and having kids and
Yes,
saying,
yeah.
wait, I want to do gaming with my kids. And certainly I think, and you hit on this, the pandemic supercharged many things, right? So there was sort of this, we went from, oh, it's not a big, to all of a sudden like, oh, either one, as you said, you didn't know what to do because those resources were gone. So you needed to sort of create your own. 2, it's a pretty low impact, system, right? You use your imagination. Maybe there's some rules, PDF print, whatever, and then and maybe some dice and you're good, right? You don't need to go invest a lot. So, we're certainly, I've been convinced that for better or worse, the pandemic supercharged a lot of imaginative play in your home, because we've been doing it forever in the role-playing space. And now people went, well, that's great for kids. It's great for adults, great for mental health because you can't get out. So it sounds like you really hit on something. It is funny though. I'm a little bit like, how did TTRPGkids? Brilliant. Like, what a great name. Like that just,
I went very literal with it. So,
but it may be straightforward, but I think it's very effective, right? That's exactly the point, right? It's not RPG Kids, because RPG Kids is a whole nother thing, right? So, then video games come into play, and you're in the SEO space of competing with all these other phrases around kids and gaming. TTRPGkids is very clearly, for those who know what TTRPG is, very clearly in that space. So I think that was a great choice, and it obviously people were finding you. So you don't, do you sleep?
It's sometimes those nights where I have a hard time sleeping is when the inspiration hits. But yes, I do my best to kind of like, there was definitely a period of time where I had a bit of difficulty with saying, this is going too much right now. I'm putting too much time into it, because I was like, oh, this would be cool to do this. Let's do that thing. Oh, it'd be cool to do this too. Let's do that one too. So I definitely, there was some lessons learned in like growing pains with that as well, where I was kind of extending too far and I needed to kind of cut back and watch my pace. So that was definitely one of the challenges with this. I think I'm getting to an okay spot with it now. So lots of requests coming in, and I'm having to say like, maybe we kind of step that back or schedule it for a little bit later. But yeah, the whole do you sleep? Yes, it's difficult sometimes.
Well, between there's also a child involved.
I want to do it. So,
there's a child too, parenting. Plus all this.
I ended up going back into teaching too, so I'm also a professor, so that I have a day job on top of it, and so it's been a challenge. It's been a fun challenge, but like it has been a challenge trying to balance everything. And,
absolutely.
Moderate myself.
It's a challenge for anybody, obviously, right? So but absolutely now, there's just so much growth. So everything I'm seeing is you are essentially a one-person, content factory, right? So you're churning out reviews, and it's something that we face at NWorld, which is you just want to be, to the extent you can, be judicious about how much you can take on, because you could literally very quickly. And again, this is partially because TTRPGkids, the field has grown, right? You were at the tip of that, and it just explodes. And then you're like, I can't review you all. And every one of you has a crowdfunding program, and like there's one every week. So please don't burn yourself out. We need you. But I appreciate that. So one of the things that comes up, and you not unusual, Dungeons and Dragons, Critical Role starts you there, right? Is how you translate that to kids. Michael Lowe and I had this discussion. I've had this discussion with several other guests, which is one of the reasons, look, if D&D just perfectly did everything, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We know it doesn't for lots of reasons. It has limitations. Doesn't mean it can't be bent or moved and modified. I did it. I frankly did the same. But conversely, there is obviously some very clear roots in, hitting stuff. And
Yeah.
with younger children, you and I encountered this with my son. It was a little bit like, I don't want to hurt it. Like, I'd rather do something else, whatever it might be. And so that's an interesting. I think at this point, this is probably not that revolutionary, the concept, but I'm curious, what have you seen in terms of address? I think we still think obviously conflict resolution is important, but it doesn't have to be violent conflict resolution. So what is your perspective on sort of how that transition can you have? So is the idea that, no TTRPG has any, for kids, has no violence, or is there a compromise, or is it a spectrum of sliding tools? What's your perspective on that?
So I think it depends on the balance for each particular kid. And it's something that you need to judge as you play and with your particular group. So, or single child, I've done a lot of solo games with my kid. With combat, I tend to step things back a little bit on the combat. I do leave it as an option because I think it's important for my kid to have that autonomy, but I give a lot of other options. So you can talk it out, or you can get tricky and come up with a clever solution. And so what we'll do is, before we jump into a fight, we'll maybe go through what are the different options that we have and how are those going to affect things? Which ones can we actually work on and what's feasible? So we will sort of like pause the game a little bit and talk about it. And that's kind of done a couple things. One is, I've already said I'm an engineer and I'm a professor. It helps my kid to practice the engineering problem solving process. Like, I have it lined up with that. So it builds those problem solving skills, but then also it gets him to look at, is fighting, which is one of the options, and he can choose it and he has before, actually the best option? Or am I going to maybe choose one of these other like 2 or 3 like decisions that I could do here? And most often, like I do kind of set it up to where we reward creativity and social encounters and things like that. So it reinforces him doing that in real life, because he's going to learn hitting things doesn't always get you the best result. Maybe it works in the short term, but there's a consequence later. Like, we hurt this person's feelings and now they don't want to help us, or something like that. So you can use that conflict and having combat in the game as a tool to help out later. One story that I like to tell is, we had a quest where there was a volcano was going to explode on this island, and my kid's character needed to find a magic ice scroll in order to cast a spell on the volcano and stop it from erupting and save the town at the bottom. We go through the whole quest. He gets the ice scroll, gets to the top of the volcano. I'm like, do you say the spell? And he goes, no. I throw the scroll into the volcano and watch it burn. And I'm like, whoa, why? And he's like, because I want to see the volcano explode. It's going to be cool. And I'm like, but what will happen if the volcano explodes? He's like, well, the island's going to blow up. It's going to go boom. And he was so excited about this. And so we talked about what's going to happen to the village and his character, who is standing at the mouth of the volcano. And he's like, no, we want to watch it explode. So I'm like, okay. We play out the volcano exploding. And he's like, okay, now my character is going to go get on the boat. I'm like, well, he can't. He's like, well, why not? Well, the volcano blew everything up. So the town's not there, and the wizard's not there, and the boat's not there. Like, oh, can we go have lunch? And just, totally didn't faze him at all.
Yeah.
But then the next time we played, I set up a situation where there's a bunch of fireworks inside of a room. And he's like, I want to go check the fireworks out. He's really interested in the fireworks. I just like left it there to kind of entice him to see what he'd do. And he I was like, what do you want to do? He's like, I kind of want to light them on fire. And then I was like, okay, what'll happen? He's like, I'm not going to do it. And he's like, I'm going to take him outside and do it. And I was like, okay, this is progress. He stopped, he thought about it, and he made like a safer choice. Like, so
That's
this
fantastic.
helps with getting into practice for doing that, because he learned this lesson in the game instead
Mhm.
of learning in real life. Maybe doing the cool explodey thing, we should stop and think about the best way to handle that.
Right.
So, you know, having options for combat and fighting and blowing things up, um, that can lead to good lessons when handled properly.
Right.
If all that you're doing is setting up, okay, fight this orc, now fight this dragon, now fight this other thing, that might not have the same positive impact as saying, hey, there's an orc in the road. Do you want to fight him, or do you want to see what he's got to say? Why is he standing there? And asking questions about that to get that rolling, and then leave options besides fighting that they can tackle. So
Absolutely. That's and I think I'd sum that up as consequences, right? That's one of the
yes,
things is
yeah,
is consequences. And sometimes, like just depending on the game, and there's some people, adults don't want to deal with consequences. That's why they play fantasy games. I get it. But conversely, I think as a teaching tool, consequences is important. And that does include the violent option, because there are consequences for that too. And it's important to learn that. Otherwise people are going to be surprised. Kids are pretty violent in school, among other places. So I think that's great, and it makes a really good point. I love that story. That
Mhm.
is hilarious. Yeah, I definitely I've seen that with adults who, we had one player who would just shoot lightning bolts at everything, and we made him
Yeah,
like it was like a whole now you're responsible for the family that you left behind. He was like, oh no, I just wanted to blow things up. But it is funny, because look, we've all been there. Like, I want to
yeah,
see the volcano explode too. I think that's great.
right,
I'd love to see the
yeah.
moment. I just don't want to be next to it. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, and that was, maybe you can watch another volcano explode or save the village first or something. I don't know. Like,
That's funny. That's
yeah,
funny. Yeah, we actually it is also funny you mentioned that, because I think in one of my kids' campaigns we did have a volcano explosion, and it was I think we used stone merge to put somebody in one of the rocks that shot out, but it was dramatic.
yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So just to switch gears slightly, and not to go too far afield of this topic, but there's an article that came out recently about in the Atlantic, and I always love seeing these things, because obviously the algorithm knows that it's trying to make me angry.
Yeah.
And I know this is a shock to you, but there's people who don't like games. They don't like they don't like games. And it's always interesting to me, because some of this, and I asked Michael this too. I was like, you and I are clearly on the same page. We get this, right? Michael and I, when we were discussing, I was like, it's like a new religion. I'm ready. Convert me.
Yeah.
Bring me in. Where are we ready to go? But it's not happening at certainly the speed we expect or the way we anticipate. The epiphany I had is that this may be part of it, right? So if you go into the background of what this is, right? So what is it? What is the reason people don't like games? Well, at least one of the arguments is it feels like it's frivolous, in a way that, to be fair, many parents are pressed for time,
Mhm.
and they are feeling like they've got to make that time count in some way, shape, or form. So for better or worse, they get socialized that game playing is sort of something that is only for kids, but not for adults, maybe to play with their kids or whatever. So I imagine there's certainly, and I've seen it, where there's definitely adults who kind of go, you know what, I actually don't want, either I don't want to be part of this, or, it's fine, you kids do it. It's not for me. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, have you encountered that at all, where you kind of get the, oh, that's gaming kind of
Yeah.
thing?
I have run into it a few times. So there's, I think, two routes where I want to talk about it. The first one is um, breaking down for people potentially like what a game is.
Hmm.
So, what do they see as a game? Is it a video game? Is it telling a story? Is it rolling dice? Where is the line for that? And then also, in psychology, there's like a lot of talk about our inner child,
Hmm.
and everyone's got that, even adults, and having room for that inner child. Like, I'm not a psychologist. It's just, this is one of the arguments that I've really consistently seen come up, is that you do need to like help your inner child. And this is a really simple way to do it that only takes maybe an hour or two out of your week for your mental health. So that's one route that I have seen a lot of people take just through, doing my own research online and like seeing from other people's experiences. The other one is in an educational setting, when you're trying to propose a tabletop RPG, a lot of times administrators don't want to hear the word game in your lesson plan. So the college course that I teach, I bring a lot of TTRPG elements into the class. Like we have a fictional class engineer who is going on a journey throughout the semester and ties into a story that gives meaning to each of the assignments. So we aren't just building a bridge, we are like building it for a Engineers Without Borders internship that is over the summer. And they're going to gain work experience and make a couple connections. And then 5 assignments later, oh, we need a networking opportunity with somebody from that activity who is now working with Greenpeace. And so we can give them a call for this other project later on. And so it teaches networking and things like that. And it's really useful because it gives meaning to it. And I can teach extra things like those networking skills with examples without really adding any extra assignments. So I want this to get into my class, but I don't want to go to the like College of Engineering and be like, hey, I want to bring tabletop role-playing game elements into my class. So I don't call it that. I don't call it a game. It is a collaborative team building exercise or a social emotional learning activity, or it is a what was it? There's like 5 or 6 different terms that I ended up using where you look at, instead of calling it a game, what are you trying to do with the game? And then call it that.
Right.
Are you focusing on collaboration? It's a collaborative activity. Are you focusing on building storytelling skills, which is a Common Core standard goal, or improving literacy? It is a literacy activity. Are you looking at improving basic math skills? It is an applied mathematics activity. So calling it that and introducing some of the elements or even the full game on that basis, you kind of present the benefits first and then bring in, well, this can commonly be called a tabletop role-playing game, or you just don't even say that and you do the activity and can bring it up later after they've been hooked. So there's a lot of ways to kind of spin it. I like to put the impact first to say, this is what the result's going to be. This is what it's commonly called. So
right.
That kind of helps a lot.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think what we bump into a lot is that it's a spectrum of free time and how we use it. And, certainly I think, therapy and psychology argues free time is important. Playtime is critical, and you can have constructive play that all play has meaning, I guess is the point, right? So you don't just play for no reason. That there's definitely been a trend to try and cut back on recess, for example. Yeah. So there's sort of, we need to sort of protect play. And what's great about obviously a TTRPG is it's bounded, right? So you've got some rules, you've got some time frames and when to do it. You've got players that are clearly identified. So hopefully that makes a space for it. That recess is tougher to justify in some ways because you're like, I don't know what the kids run around.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing, right? So I do think TTRPGs, and to your point, the framework, even if you don't want to call them that, provides a path forward for a lot of kids and hopefully a lot of parents to see how that can be helpful. I want to loop back to something you mentioned previously because I think it's important. Obviously the pandemic was a big thing, and I bring this up a lot, and I think people are getting sick of hearing about the pandemic, but I don't think we can underestimate how much this sort of blew open some topics or made them more, maybe raise some issues that we weren't thinking about or change things. Now, you said this happened, TTRPGkids sort of was during the pandemic, right? So it was an outgrowth of that. What did you see? So now, pandemic's not over, but let's pretend that, everybody's acting like it is, but it's certainly changing, right? So I feel like directionally society is sort of moving on in a different way. What are you seeing from the TTRPG kid space as someone, I think you could argue, came out of that in some ways because of the pandemic?
Yeah. So I see that it is growing still, even with the shift back to like kind of a different routine. It's kind of similar to what it was before a lot of the shutdown, but it's modified is I think kind of, what we're looking at. And one of the modifications is, I think, more awareness about screen time. And this is something that is a screen-free activity that you can say, here's a tabletop RPG, kids, and have fun. It's an alternative to sports for kids who don't want to do sports but still want that team building exercise. There's a lot of ways to connect with it that I think people started to see because of the pandemic, and it's continuing to grow from that, because it's become part of kind of the culture a little bit now. Look at Critical Role. They have their own TV show that is like the most watched show on like the channel or like the stations that it's on. It's just or like the streaming service.
Yeah.
It's #1 for like weeks.
On Amazon, yeah.
Yeah. And so like that, there's the D&D movie that just came out.
Yeah. And
it keeps like kind of building and becoming more visible, which I think is really going to help with this. And it kind of starts like ticking away at some of the stigma too, that there was kind of like the whole satanic panic thing, and like some people still have maybe some concerns about that,
right?
Or talking about play and looking at, is this something that we can like make time for? The D&D movie was marketed, I think, at adults, and so it like that was kind of the vibe I was getting. And so it's kind of
I'm just gonna let you put it back.
Yeah. Yes. It is an awesome dialogue.
Probably worth like $1 million now. But I got my local movie theater. I'm not on camera. I should put myself on camera. But my local movie theater, they were like, yeah, like someone else came in here to see this, and I ended up getting this pop. I was really concerned they were going to sell out, and now they go like they're reselling for ridiculous pricing. I was like, I didn't think it was that hot of a commodity, but okay.
Yeah. But like that's what I mean though. Like there's like pop culture around it, and it's becoming like more and more visible and like prevalent. And I think that's a good thing for this. It's like throughout the pandemic, I think it busted everything up. People looked at things a little bit differently, and now coming out of it, they're sort of taking the good parts that they experienced during that time. And I think for a lot of people, one of those good parts was playing tabletop RPGs, listening to Critical Role, watching shows and movies about it, reading about it, watching interviews. Those were some of the good things that I think people are kind of keeping with them. Does that kind of answer the question?
Totally. No,
Okay.
Totally. One of the things that was interesting for me is, of course, now my kids are biased, right? So they, at this point, I think they roll their eyes if I'm like, oh, look, it's a role play. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
My son now, who's just about 16, all of a sudden there was the wave of like, now it's actually cool, right? Like, so there was this moment, and I was like, everybody be cool. Don't make a big deal. I'm not going to make any sudden moves. My son was like, yeah, I'm going to play a D&D campaign. This kid's in high school. And I was like, okay, this is the moment.
Breathe.
Right, breathe through it. Because I was so like, the thing that, because what happened was, of course, they grew up with this. We're called the Dragon House for a reason. And then after that, then it was like, oh man, like dad wants to do this thing again. And then his friends would come over and they'd be like, holy cow, there's like a whole thing of miniatures and your dad plays D&D. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. Yeah. And then, so now, teenage years, they're coming back to it. But it is an interesting sort of cycle because I think in a lot of ways, like you said, you had to give it a chance, right? So tabletop gaming, which is an imaginative play, was competing with so many other things, and suddenly we didn't have that competition in some ways.
Mhm.
We had a chance to sort of reset and figure it out. And I think that's huge. I think to your point, people were home with their kids more, and we're like,
Mhm.
well, what do I do with the kids?
That is a big
Honestly,
one. Yeah.
one of the things because I'm a scout leader, I taught the game design merit badge, which was fascinating, and we would play D&D,
Mhm.
or at least elements of it to try and get them to sort of think about game design and such. And it was amazing to see how many of them were like, yeah, I played that, or I have my own campaign. And I was like, what happened while I was away?
Yeah.
Because I was in my bubble with my kids, and it was really fascinating. So I think you're right. I think all that has changed probably for the better. I also think, and you touched on this briefly, there was concern about kids' mental health. I see it still. It keeps coming up. I see it in the news. I saw it in the news, I think 2 days ago. They were like, people are discovering kids are anxious, depressed, etc. And there's a real concern about how we address that. And certainly more communication and playing with your children, I think, goes a long way
Mhm.
to sort of at least keep you in touch. It doesn't solve everything, but it at least lets you get a temperature of what's going on. As it does with adults. I always say, like, it's there's an article I have coming out, but some of the people who don't like the game don't like role-playing games because it says a lot about them.
Yeah.
It really
It can be
does.
very revealing.
Yeah.
Like,
And that's one of the arguments in the Atlantic article was some people don't want to play. It's a relationship accelerator because the argument is you learn about somebody through trials and sort of experiences. And as you mentioned earlier, the nature of tabletop role-playing games is to put those choices in front of you. You may not know that about an adult or even a kid if you haven't been in what I hope aren't fireworks or lava volcano situations.
yeah.
So, but you get to do that in a role-playing game. So very quickly, as I say, my favorite phrase I say a lot is I have that person's number pretty quick. And gaming does that for sure. So,
Mhm.
which is interesting, but I think there's people who are a little intimidated by that. They're like, oh, and then thankfully we have streams, we have Critical Role that sort of dismissed that because it's actually fun. It's not like it's an
Yeah.
psychological interrogation.
Yes. Yeah.
It's natural and organic, I hope, for a lot of people. And if you enjoy yourself, you don't even notice that you show what you're like in a crisis.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's great. And I do think, you've become this nexus, although I think you're like a one person crew here, right? So are there
Yeah.
expansion plans? Or are you just going to keep trying to write everybody's reviews and support all their crowdfunding? Like, how are you going to do this?
I We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
Right now, the plan is to continue with the one-person show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I have had a couple people reach out asking about writing guest articles and things like that.
Absolutely. I'm
I've done
sure there are.
article
Yeah.
swaps with people before.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some opportunity to start bringing in some other voices.
Yeah.
Um, we'll see where it goes. So
Stay tuned.
It depends very much on how things go the next few months, I think. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Fair. Fair. Speaking of supporting crowdfunding, you have a crowdfunder campaign as well. The reason I found this and even know to bring it up is because I saw it there, and I think you're running. I don't know if you're running ads, but I'm getting stuff. I think as you're posting, maybe I'm seeing things. So tell us about it. What are you doing?
So the crowdfunder campaign is to help support TTRPGkids. There's site fees, stuff for convention travel, and then also my first printed game, which 5 minutes before calling into this, I got a knock on the door and it was the proof copy got delivered. So
Look at that.
big reveal. It's kind of blipping off the screen.
There it is. That's perfect. Yeah, I know. There's like a zone where you get it close
Yeah,
enough, but not too
kind of
far
get it
away.
like right in there. I don't know if it's going to show super great,
That's
but
okay.
it is Baker's Charge.
I see it.
And
Yes.
it's an actual book with my artwork in it and everything.
So exciting.
I'm very excited for that. So most of it is to fund the site and a lot of the like bits and pieces of expansion I'm trying to do with it. So I run TTRPGkids as a free resource for everyone. I write reviews for creators for free. and post articles, tips and tricks, lists of information that I've gathered so that way you don't have to search around for it. Write reviews on books and whatnot, so you can find supplemental material to add to your games, or like fill in that gap between game sessions and so on. I do that all for free, but it's not exactly free to me because there
sure
are
isn't.
costs for paying for website domains and storage and email address and things like that, business license and whatnot. So I can't really keep covering it out of pocket. So I want to use the crowdfunder to support that. I also want to start expanding TTRPGkids beyond the digital kind of realm that it's been in. We talk a lot about how TTRPGs are a great screen-free activity, but to make TTRPGkids, I spend a lot of time on the screen writing, and I want to start going a little bit more screen-free by going to conventions and giving talks. We've already done a few this year, and I have several planned for throughout the year, along with maybe like some booths at a couple conventions. So it's to help fund travel for that. And let me kind of grow the site and help it be more accessible to a larger crowd of people, get more input, and be able to share it a little bit more. So that's what the crowdfunder is supporting.
And when does it start?
It
Not
starts
yet,
June 15th. Right now it's in pre-launch.
Okay.
So if you either subscribe to the TTRPGkids newsletter, or on the site, there's a link that goes to the crowdfunder pre-launch page where you can watch the video and everything already. You can subscribe on there and you'll get updates just on the crowdfunder campaign. So
fantastic. Well, all right. So yeah, so definitely there's plans for TTRPGkids for not just you to do it, but also to support and expand. That's exciting. So we're absolutely going to support you. That's my next question, but we're already on that path. So yeah, support the crowdfunder, right? That's one way we can support you. Where are you going? What you said, you're going to conventions. Do you have anything planned in the future?
This weekend, actually, I am going to be speaking at Motor City Comic-Con. So it's
nice.
my hometown convention, which I'm really excited about because I have attended this convention for several years and they asked me to come in and speak. So I'm really geeked for that one. In June, I'm going to be going to Origins Game Fair with, I got together a whole bunch of panels and games and a workshop and everything and submitted them all, thinking that maybe half of them would get approved, but the whole thing got approved. So I am running a lot of events at Origins Game Fair. So I'll be in it's Columbus, Ohio for Origins Game Fair. There's I am trying to hit up a bunch of farmers markets throughout the summer in Michigan. And then there's GrandCon in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and UConn in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that I'm setting up booths at. So trying to reduce the travel costs as much as I can. And then I'd also like to go to PAX Unplugged if I could in Pennsylvania
that would be amazing.
December. So I'm trying to reduce the travel cost by doing stuff within driving distance, but sometimes there's hotels and things that still need to get covered. So that's part of like what's in the crowdfunder, but I'm excited about it. I've been kind of getting some cool groups of people together. I think it's like 8 people between all the panels for Origins Game Fair. So all these contacts I've been making through like reviews, interviews, recommendations from people. It's kind of like, hey, you three, you all are kind of in this like area of like these 3 states bordering each other that are kind of close to Origins Game Fair. Would you like to all drive in and do a panel on tabletop RPGs and therapeutics or tabletop RPGs and education? And they're all like, oh yeah, I would love to do that. And so it just kind of all came together, which was really cool. So I'm excited for that. And there's people signing up for them. And I haven't actually like posted about it on social media yet. And I think one of them's already half full. So it's like, oh, this is really cool. So it's been good.
You are definitely in good company. Yeah, it's something that I keep promising. The pandemic just blew the whole thing up, but we wanted to have a CAR-PGA meeting at Gen Con, for example. And I'm in the intersection of several different sort of groups, but yeah, it takes some effort. So that's kudos to you for putting that together, which is fantastic. And then, like you said, people organizing it and doing it is I'm starting to see a theme. Website, TTRPGkids, getting other
Yeah.
folks together. That's fantastic, and I'm not surprised. But that's exciting. Yeah, yeah. I guess so Michigan's sort of your zone. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
great.
from Michigan, so if you have the Michigan
Oh,
map,
yeah, you need to know. Yep.
like, but I'm about there, so like maybe like a little more this way.
Yeah,
So
my in-laws
no,
are right there too. So I
yeah,
may be like, so what you doing, Steph? Because I
yeah,
visit
for
during the
sure.
summer. So I may come by and be like, yeah, because to
Yeah,
your
we have
point,
for lunch or
I'm
something.
never there during the geek stuff. Unfortunately, we're there to see family,
Yeah,
obviously in a short period of time. But there are now at least 2 or 3 people in the area there that I'm like, I have to just come by and say
yeah,
hi. So
yeah.
that's exciting. Well, and I'm super excited for you and you haven't been to Origins before? Is this your
No, this will
first
be
or?
my first time, so I've heard good things.
Oh yeah, no, I loved it. There was a time when I used to go to all these. I don't go to anything now, but I used to go to everything.
Yeah.
So the pandemic sort of put an end to all of that. And I think you were saying earlier you've been to some other places. Where else have you been in terms of conventions and what you've done presentations?
So this year I was at GaryCon Ethereal. So I had a designated kid-friendly Discord channel that I sponsored, and then gave talks there, did some games and stuff. Before that, I was at South by Southwest EDU. You
Exciting.
mentioned Michael Lowe. There
Yeah.
was Michael Lowe, Marianne Sullivan, and or Marianne Cullinan, I'm sorry, Marianne Cullinan and Chris Hopper and I all went to South by Southwest EDU, and we ran a workshop and like a talk / panel together. And then the year before that, which is the thing that kind of got me hooked on the idea of going to conventions, in the summer of 2022, I went to FanX was Dallas. Yeah, FanX Dallas. Yeah, with a group called D20 Tales, who runs a podcast, and did like a talk and ran some games for TTRPGkids alongside them. That was a lot of fun. So kind of between FanX and then going to South by Southwest, it's kind of like this is really working. It's nice to connect with people and sit down and have conversations with people like, oh, this looks interesting. Can you tell me more? Versus it, like, social media has been a great way to connect, but it's also been kind of nice to talk with people either like virtually in like a Zoom meeting like this or through Discord, or like answering questions in a panel or talking with people afterwards. It's been really cool. So, and there's been a lot of people I think have made some good connections and contacted me after about, hey, could I chew your ear a little bit on this topic? And it's been nice. So getting
That's
good
fantastic.
feedback and results.
Yeah, you're at a nexus point. I mean, for a bunch of things, right? Timing, right? So coming out of the pandemic, people were probably, I think, certainly that was I mentioned Mike Best, and he's done his Crafty Quest boxes through Kids Arcanum. That came out of the pandemic, right? It was sort of, I want to do something with my kids, and I'm home with my kids. What can we do? But he certainly, he's not the only one. Obviously, you've picked up on that, and it sounds like you've got an entire community that feels the same. So I think that's part of it. The timing of things starting to change and people being able to get back together means the opportunities to network in person again, which is fantastic. And like I said, the age is right. Essentially, people are growing up who grew up with games and then saying, well, I want my kid to play games. Like, how do we do this? And it's easier. The barrier to entry is easier than it ever has been, I hope, for folks. So even though there's still people that the Atlantic feels don't get.
There'll always be someone.
I know. There's like, we'll talk about it offline. I have a bad reaction to people like, oh, game, that's like a waste of time, and just, but I will keep that aside. That's a personal problem. So where can we find you? I mean, obviously TTRPGkids.com. That was a spoiler alert. I gave it away. But beyond that, where else can we find you so we can make sure people follow your socials?
Yeah. I am on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Mastodon, Reddit, and Discord.
And all as
all of them.
TTRPG kids, or?
Yeah, it's all as TTRPG kids. I tried to make it as easy as I could because I can't keep track of all the different names myself. So it's all TTRPG kids. I think one of them is TTRPG kids _ Steph C.
Okay.
Just because, one platform somebody had already
Yeah,
taken
right.
the name.
As
So
I was saying, I was amazed you got the website, because like
yeah,
it is somewhat.
yeah,
I mean, when you think about it, you're like, of course, TTRPG kids.
yeah.
So I am
I
surprised that
applied for it and I
that's
was
only
like, I
one.
hope it goes through.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I checked like a couple different variations and I was like, oh, this is still available.
Wow,
It's in
that's
now
great.
before it gets taken. So yeah, it's all TTRPG kids. If you look up TTRPG kids Linktree, that will have everything on it as well. So you can just kind of like click, 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 click. The website also is kind of like, I like having things organized, if you could not tell, and
I've
having
noticed,
things like
yes.
funnel into like one point. So if you go to TTRPGkids.com, there's like icons for a lot of the socials that will lead you there as well. So it's kind of my hopefully easy website address to remember and then kind of springboard off of. So.
Excellent. Yeah, I feel like maybe we should share that link tree afterwards. So that's great. Well, you've been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time. Anything else you want to add? Is there anything we didn't cover? I feel like we covered quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the big thing is just to like try it out. If you've been playing tabletop RPGs with adults and you're like, oh, well, I can't wait until my kid is 8, or I can't wait until my kid is 7 or 6. It's okay to start out really, I don't want to say small, but start with the basics, which is storytelling. I started my kid at 2 with collaborative storytelling, where I would tell part of the story and ask him what happened next. And then we slowly added things in, added in rolling a D4 when he could count up to 4, and like step the die up, and started adding other mechanics. There's games out there that use rock, paper, scissors as the mechanics. I have one where you pull tokens out of a cup that have symbols for different elements on them, so you don't even have to count. Things like that. It doesn't need to be a complicated system to be a good one. So I may be preaching to the choir a bit with like this group, but it's okay to start out really young with something that isn't a formal TTRPG. Storytelling can be like a really easy springboard for a very young child to get them into it. And it really helped my kid out when we started with that collaborative storytelling. And it helped me too with that connection. So that's my big one. And then I've been signing off a lot of my posts and social media tweets and things like that with thank you for checking out TTRPG Kids and happy gaming. So thank you for having me on. And it was very nice talking with you as well.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere. We'll stop the recording in a minute, but really appreciate your time. What we'll do is as we always will put it in our newsletter. We'll make sure we link. I think the link tree might be the plan, but in addition to TTRPG Kids, but we'll make sure we get all those links. We'll make the YouTube channel available. This recording will be available and will be part of our channel and part of our series. Thank you again, Steph. I appreciate you taking the time.